that are required to capture the reality of how the industry has been testing itself. What are the prospects, you think, of some of these new techniques helping the industry break out of its extremely clubby nature, such that we're actually starting to bring in the end user perspective and get away from this vendor-centric approach where the tests are cooked, the ballots are rigged, the samples are all made up. I mean, I'm thinking of the Consumer Reports thing where they commissioned Avi Rubin's group to generate samples, and this pissed off, McAfee and a bunch of other folks. I mean, what we're talking about here, does it stand a chance of changing the dynamic between the companies, the testing organizations, and the end users?
Here's the thing. I'm going to say something controversial, so it depends on whether you want to go.
What's that? There should be a much more conversation between the testers and the vendors for doing the right things. Not in case of the things how the vendor wants the test have configured. That's the thing we do as testers. We configure our tests like we want to do it. But we have to be sure that our data that we provide to the customer could be interpreted in the right way. There must be not to a large error margin of this, because the statistical data is getting less. Instead of testing millions of samples, you can only test about 200,000 samples a year. For us, it's not possible to test more samples a year with the whole product test. It's too much work. For the on-demand test, we need about 30 workstations with 2 terabyte on hard disks on it, and that's it for the whole product test. And anyway, we need about 200 to 300 servers which are working on it, and that's the biggest deal for us. Nowadays we have about 400 terabytes of data storage in our lab, and all over we are using with honeypots and FTP servers about 600 workstations. And that's the big deal for us to get the financing for this. It's much expensive than a few years ago, and much more work. The most expensive things are the guys which are doing the tests. On-demand test it's possible to do for 3 to 4 persons, and the whole product tests we need about nowadays we are 8 persons which are doing the tests, and we need more and more. That's the expensive thing on this thing.
So better collaboration between the vendors and the testing organizations. Okay.
So I think that I think the clubbiness needs to stop, of the AV community, because what we've seen is it's become so inbred that problems basically just they get recycled. Right. Without outside air, people aren't able to realize of the problems that they have. And, other testing labs, they make their living by being paid by vendors. Right. So neither one of us do. Right. But I think everyone else does. Right. So they're not going to test something that the vendors don't want to have tested. Right, which means that fundamentally things are never going to get better. So what we're doing, I think what Peter's working on, is showing what the way things really are. Okay, now in terms of the clubbiness, AMSO is a great example for researchers to share information with one another. I think that's wonderful because the bad guys are ahead of everybody. From an organization that does anything beyond that, it's a bunch of vendors and their pets, and I think that frankly, it's probably a cartel, and it's probably has some antitrust issues here in the U.S. So I don't believe in general, I don't believe in AMSO in terms of trying to make testing better, because they've proven they don't want to. They're trying to hold back testing until they can make their products better, so that then when testing does get better, their products will do better, right? So so this is the controversial part. So, in terms of clubbiness and all that, I mean, I guess you know, I have a U.S. view, which is very different from a European view, which tends to be more community oriented. And I think that, as you mentioned, that the marketplace, you know, is saturated, and people are going to have to start competing. And I think that's where hopefully some of the clubbiness will end, because you know, what's happened is that with a lot of the sharing, you know, the perspective is that everybody's the same and everybody's got each other's backs. And, you know, fundamentally, there are some products that are a lot better and some products that are a lot worse. And the folks that are better are not being rewarded for their investment, the way the current system works. And the folks that are worse are being rewarded for their bad behavior and not making their products better. So, you know, the top products that spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in research, you know, they're doing it because they believe in it, not because from a business perspective it makes sense. And it's fundamentally broken, and that's, I think, a large degree because of how clubby the AV community is. So sorry, I think I missed something important here. Are you suggesting that the amount of money has any, I mean, do the vendors with bigger labs, are they actually better at what they do? Or there's an economy of scale with the URL reputation systems. So the bigger the customer base, what we've seen is that, you know, that the more their reputation system has an impact. Also, the bigger companies, I'll say McAfee and Trend, is because they're some of the first. Kaspersky also has some reputation. They're doing better, you know, and those are some of the top products. And they, you know, the folks that don't have the budget, that don't have the people, you know, they're riding on the coattails, and they're riding, you know, the VB100s and the West Coast labs and the ICSA tests that say everybody's perfect, and they try and paint a picture that AV is a commodity, right? And the problem is it's really not. I mean, there's huge differences in the technologies. So you know, there's rewards for being, you know, if you're think about it as, like, I'm going to use a U.S. pro football analogy. If you're a cheapskate owner and you don't invest in your players, right? Because of the revenue sharing with the NFL, with the TV spots and everything, you can make a lot of money, right? It doesn't, you know, there's a disincentive in the NFL for you know, the guy, unless you win the Super Bowl, to make a huge investment and have a huge payroll. The same thing goes in the AV world, okay? Because of the way it's clubby, because of the way it's sharing, because of all the sort of the backdoor relationships, there's a distortion that's happened.
So who's the Kansas City Chiefs of the AV world right now?
AVG.
Anybody else?
Panda's pretty close.
Anybody else?
You know,
It gets a little bit better as you go on.
wait, but what do you think about the regional protection? I mean, so let's say you were a large company in Hungary or in Spain. I mean, what would be top of your pick? For localized, specialized.
Versus IE to test Aurora is not a regional issue.
I'm talking about IEG.
Right.
Let me answer
You're talking about
Yeah. So I think that what we've seen in our tests, we have feeds from all over the world, is that most of what we're seeing is it's either U.S. or Spanish or Chinese. That's like the majority of it, and while yes, there's differences on the fringes depending on your geographic region. That's less than, I'd say, 1% to 2% right now. I mean, it's important. It's going to grow. But the geographic distinction has been way overplayed. I mean, when you're getting 28% versus 88%, 1 or 2 points based upon your region doesn't make much difference.
Yeah. I'm just asking from almost like a service-based perspective. Is that most vendors will first of all take into consideration needs of their top customers, and if they're based out of I don't know Germany, Czech Republic, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
in Spain, is they are most likely going to have lots of large local customers with lots of localized problems
Mm-hmm.
that would not be seen by other vendors, perhaps, and their protection would be heavier in certain regions. And certain
I think that would be great. I think it'd be great if it went that direction. The problem is that everybody's sharing, so the actual differences tend to be in the engine, not in what they're seeing beforehand. And when I say their engines,
what do you
it's
mean by sharing of samples.
Yeah.
But the daily sharing of samples is a tiny fraction of what everyone's seeing. I mean, if you're seeing, 50,000 samples, and I don't know what are the typical sharing amounts.
Well, it
500.
tends to be the same sources, though, right? I mean, everybody as an AV vendor knows that, like, the trend sources are pretty close to the McAfee core sources. They're pretty close to the semantic sources. It's